The taste of blood filled my mouth as my father's fist connected with my jaw for the third time. "Get out of my house!" he screamed, his face purple with rage. All because I'd finally stood up to my brother Marcus when he called me a failure not worth celebrating on my 20th birthday. The cake sat untouched on the kitchen table, 20 candles still flickering as I stumbled toward the door, clutching my ribs. "You're no son of mine anymore." Those words would haunt me for months until I discovered the truth that would destroy them both. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there. From the moment Marcus threw his first touchdown pass in 8th grade, he became the golden child who could do no wrong in our household. Meanwhile, I struggled through school with what I now know was dyslexia, but back then, my father, Richard Thompson, just saw me as lazy and stupid. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became his favorite phrase. Marcus made honor roll every semester, while I fought to maintain a C average. He was captain of the football team while I spent my afternoons in remedial reading classes. Every family dinner became a celebration of Marcus's latest achievement and a reminder of my latest disappointment. My mother, Sarah, always took Marcus's side too. When he broke my science project in 5th grade, she said I should have put it somewhere safer. When he borrowed money from my birthday savings to buy his girlfriend a necklace, she told me I needed to learn to share. The favoritism was so obvious that even our neighbors started to notice. By high school, the divide had grown into a canyon. Marcus received a full scholarship to State University for football, while I worked 2 jobs just to afford community college classes. He got a brand new truck for his 18th birthday, while I rode my beat-up bike to work every day. The disparity was crushing, but I kept hoping things would change. The night that destroyed everything started innocently enough. Mom had made my favorite chocolate cake, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe this birthday would be different. Maybe they actually wanted to celebrate me for once. But as soon as we sat down for dinner, the conversation shifted to Marcus's latest accomplishments at college. Marcus made Dean's List again. Dad announced proudly, cutting himself another slice of roast beef. His coach thinks he might go professional after graduation. "That's wonderful," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Maybe we could talk about something else, though. It is my birthday." Marcus laughed, that condescending sound I'd grown to hate. "What's there to celebrate about you? You're barely passing your classes at community college. Dad's been supporting a failure for 20 years. That's when something snapped inside me. 20 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family came pouring out. "I'm not a failure," I said, my voice rising. "I work 60 hours a week while going to school. I've never asked for handouts like you do." "Don't you dare raise your voice at your brother," Dad snarled, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "Marcus has earned every good thing that's happened to him." "By doing what? Playing a game," I shot back. "I've been working since I was 15 while he parties every weekend on your dime." That's when Marcus delivered the killing blow. "You're a failure that is not worth celebrating. This whole family would be better off if we stopped pretending you matter." The words hit me like a physical blow, but instead of backing down like I always had before I stood up and faced him. At least I'm earning everything I get, honestly. I don't even remember exactly what I said next, but suddenly, Dad was on me, his fist crashing into my face with the force of 20 years of disappointment and rage. The second punch caught me in the ribs, and the third sent me stumbling backward into the wall. "Get out!" he roared. "You're no son of mine anymore. Pack your things and get out of my house." Mom sat frozen at the table, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't say a word to stop him. Marcus just smirked and took another bite of cake like nothing had happened. I stumbled to my room, tasting blood and fighting back tears. My jaw was already swelling, and each breath sent sharp pains through my ribs. As I threw clothes into a garbage bag, my hands were shaking with shock and adrenaline. That's when I saw it. While reaching under my bed for my work boots, my fingers brushed against a manila folder that had fallen from Dad's dresser when he'd stormed past earlier. Without thinking, I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were dozens of documents that made my blood run cold. Letters from creditors, past due notices, and loan documents. But the worst part was the amount at the bottom of a summary sheet. Richard Thompson owed $75,000 to someone called Vincent Moretti, and the payments were 6 months overdue. My father, who'd spent years lecturing me about responsibility and hard work, was apparently a gambling addict in debt to what looked like very dangerous people. The same man who'd just beaten me and thrown me out for standing up to his precious golden boy was living a complete lie. I photographed every document with my phone before carefully returning the folder to its hiding place. As I finished packing, a plan began forming in my mind. They wanted to treat me like I didn't matter. They were about to learn just how much I actually knew. The first month on Jake's couch was brutal. My friend had generously offered me space in his tiny one-bedroom apartment, but sleeping in someone's living room while working double shifts made every day feel like a marathon. The warehouse job started at 5 in the morning, and pizza delivery ran until midnight most nights. Between the two jobs, I was pulling in just enough money to cover my share of rent and community college tuition. The physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. For the first 2 weeks, I called and texted my family every day, hoping someone would answer. Mom, Dad, even Marcus. Every call went straight to voicemail. Every text was ignored completely. It was like I'd been erased from their lives. The loneliness ate at me worse than anything else. I'd grown up in that house, slept in that room, eaten at that table for 20 years. Now, I was completely cut off, living like a stranger in my own hometown. Jake did his best to keep my spirits up, but even he started to worry. Man, you're wasting away, he said one evening when I came home from my delivery route. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Truth was, I'd been surviving on pizza scraps and whatever free food the warehouse vending machine would give me when it malfunctioned. Every dollar went to rent or school, and there wasn't much left for luxuries like actual meals. 3 weeks after the birthday disaster, I decided to try a different approach. Marcus had been dating Emma Rodriguez since sophomore year of high school, and she'd always been kind to me. Maybe she could get through to him when I couldn't reach anyone else directly. I found Emma at the coffee shop where she worked part-time between her nursing classes. When she saw me walk in, her face immediately showed concern. My jaw had healed, but I was still thinner than I should have been, and probably looked as rough as I felt. Ezra, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure her manager wasn't watching. Are you okay? Marcus told me what happened. What exactly did he tell you? I asked, ordering the cheapest coffee on the menu. Emma hesitated, then led me to a corner table away from other customers. He said you attacked him during dinner, and that your dad had to defend him. He said you've been having anger issues and that the family was worried about your mental state. The lies hit me like a physical blow. Emma, that's not what happened at all. I explained the real story. How Marcus had called me worthless. How I'd simply defended myself with words, how Dad had been the one throwing punches. Emma's expression grew more troubled with every detail. Marcus said you were becoming unstable, she murmured. He showed me photos of bruises on his arms and said you'd grabbed him. My heart sank. Marcus had always been clever, but manufacturing evidence was a new low even for him. Emma, I never touched him. You've known me for years. Have I ever been violent? She shook her head slowly. No, but people change. Stress can do strange things. That conversation made it clear that my family wasn't just ignoring me. They were actively working to destroy my reputation. Anyone who might have helped me reconcile with them was being fed lies about my character and mental state. The betrayal fueled a different kind of determination. If they wanted to play games, I could play better than they realized. That folder of gambling debts was just the beginning. If Dad was hiding something that serious, what else might I find? My breakthrough came through Derek, a forklift operator at the warehouse who'd become a friend over the months we'd worked together. Derek was one of those guys who knew everyone in town, and his network of connections turned out to be exactly what I needed. My sister Amanda works at First National Bank. He mentioned one day during our lunch break. She processes business accounts for small companies around town. Why? I'd been careful not to reveal too much about my family situation, but Derek had noticed my mood and the bruises that were taking forever to fade completely. When I explained that I suspected my father of financial irregularities in his construction business, Derek's expression grew serious. That's heavy stuff, man. You sure you want to go down this road? I nodded. They've made it clear I'm not family anymore. But if he's stealing from his business partners and employees, people deserve to know. Derek arranged for me to meet Amanda at a diner across town after her shift ended. She was a professional woman in her 30s, with the careful demeanor of someone who took banking regulations seriously. Derek says you have concerns about Thompson Construction's accounts, she said after we'd ordered coffee. I have reason to believe my father may be using company funds for personal expenses, I explained. If that's true, it could affect the employees and contractors who depend on the business. Amanda studied me carefully. I can't share specific account information, but I can tell you that irregularities in business accounts are something we take very seriously. If you have evidence of fraud, there are proper channels for reporting it. What would constitute evidence? Falsified invoices, forged signatures, unauthorized transfers. Anything that shows company money being diverted for non-business purposes. She leaned forward slightly. But you'd need documentation. Bank statements, contracts, receipts. The kind of paperwork that proves a pattern of abuse. That's when I realized I needed to go beyond the gambling debt folder. I needed to get access to Dad's business records, and that meant getting creative about how I gathered information. The answer came from an unexpected source. Louis Franklin had been Dad's business partner for over a decade, handling the administrative side, while Dad managed construction crews. I'd met Louis dozens of times over the years, and he'd always seemed like an honest guy who genuinely cared about doing good work. I waited outside his office one evening, knowing he usually stayed late to finish paperwork. When he came out to his truck, I stepped out of the shadows where I'd been waiting. Ezra. Louis looked surprised, but not unfriendly. I heard there was some trouble at home. You doing okay? Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the business, I said. I think there might be some financial problems you should know about. Louis frowned and gestured for me to get in his truck. What kind of problems? I showed him photos of the gambling debt documents, watching his face grow pale as he realized the implications. $75,000, he whispered. No wonder the contracts have been so tight lately. There's more, I said. I think he's been taking money from business accounts to cover the debts. Louis was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands on the steering wheel. Finally, he looked at me with a mixture of sadness and anger. I've been noticing discrepancies for months, he admitted. Invoices that don't match the work we actually did. Payments to suppliers that seem too high for what we ordered. Equipment that disappears from job sites. Do you have records? Everything goes through the office computer system. Your dad has the master password, but I maintain backup files. Louis's jaw tightened. If he's been stealing from the business, he's been stealing from every employee and subcontractor who depends on us for their livelihood. That night, Louis agreed to help me gather evidence. Not for revenge, he emphasized, but to protect the honest people who worked for Thompson Construction. If Dad was committing fraud, it needed to stop before the business collapsed and took innocent families down with it. Over the next week, Louis provided me with copies of suspicious invoices, bank transfer records, and inventory reports that didn't add up. The pattern was clear. Dad had been systematically siphoning money from the business for at least 8 months, probably to pay gambling debts and fund Marcus's college lifestyle. But I needed one more piece of evidence before I could confront anyone. I needed proof that Marcus knew what was happening. The opportunity came when I was delivering pizza to a neighborhood near the university. I spotted Marcus's new truck parked outside an expensive apartment complex that I knew was way beyond what a college student could afford, even with a football scholarship. I parked across the street and waited. When Marcus finally came out, He was with two teammates I recognized from newspaper sports photos. They were laughing and talking loudly about their spring break plans to Cancun. That's when it hit me. Marcus was living a lifestyle that required serious money, more than a scholarship and part-time job could provide. Dad wasn't just stealing to pay gambling debts. He was stealing to maintain the golden boy's image. The rage that filled me was different from the hurt and betrayal I'd been feeling. This was cold, calculated anger that sharpened my thinking instead of clouding it. They wanted to destroy me to protect their lies. I was going to bring their whole house of cards crashing down. But first, I needed to get Marcus on record admitting what he knew. The plan took weeks to develop properly. I couldn't just walk up to Marcus and start asking questions about Dad's finances. He'd shut down immediately and probably report back to our parents that I was stalking him or becoming more unstable. I needed to catch him off guard in a situation where he might reveal information without realizing it. The opportunity came through Emma. Despite the lies Marcus had told her about me, she was still troubled by inconsistencies in his story. When I called her again, she agreed to meet me for lunch at a neutral location downtown. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she said after we'd ordered sandwiches. "Some things don't add up." "Like what?" "Marcus said you attacked him, but he couldn't explain why there were no marks on him, while you obviously had a broken nose and bruised ribs." Emma stirred her soup absently. "And his story keeps changing. First, he said you threw a punch. Then, he said you grabbed him. Then, he claimed you threatened him with a knife." Hope flickered in my chest. "Emma, I never touched him. I swear on my mother's life." "I believe you," she said quietly. "But there's something else. Marcus has been spending money like crazy lately. Expensive dinners, new clothes, that spring break trip to Mexico that costs $3,000. When I asked where it was coming from, he got defensive and said his dad was helping him out. How much help are we talking about? Thousands of dollars. Way more than a family should be able to afford, especially with you working 2 jobs just to pay for community college." Emma looked directly at me. "Ezra, is your family wealthy? Because Marcus is living like someone with serious money." I leaned forward carefully. "Emma, if I told you that our dad was in financial trouble, serious trouble, would that surprise you?" Her eyes widened. "What kind of trouble?" I showed her some of the gambling debt documents on my phone, watching her face change as she realized the implications. $75,000 to people who don't accept late payments. "Oh my God," she whispered. "And Marcus knows about this." "That's what I need to find out." Emma agreed to help, but she wanted to do it carefully to protect herself. She suggested hosting a casual gathering at her apartment, where Marcus might feel relaxed enough to let his guard down. If I happened to be in the area and stopped by unexpectedly, it might create the perfect opportunity for an honest conversation. The setup worked better than I'd hoped. Emma invited Marcus and 2 of his teammates over for dinner on a Friday night. I showed up around 8:30 with a pizza from the place where I worked, claiming I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd say hello. Marcus was clearly unhappy to see me, but the presence of his friends and Emma made it difficult for him to cause a scene. After some awkward small talk, I steered the conversation toward family finances. "I've been thinking about what happened on my birthday," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Dad seemed really stressed about money that night. Is the business doing okay?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but didn't answer directly. One of his teammates, a guy named Brad, jumped in instead. "Your dad's construction company is doing great," he said. "Marcus was just telling us about some big contracts they landed." "Really?" I looked at Marcus. "That's good news. I was worried after seeing all those past due notices in his office." The blood drained from Marcus's face. "What past due notices?" "You know, the ones in that manila folder. The letters from creditors and loan companies." I watched his expression carefully. "I figured you'd seen them since Dad talks to you about everything." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, but his voice was tight with tension. "Come on," I pressed gently. Dad's been giving you money for months. The new truck, the apartment, the spring break trip. You had to know where it was coming from. That's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. Instead of denying everything, he got angry. Dad worked hard for that money. He deserves to help his son who's actually making something of himself. Emma and the teammates exchanged glances. Marcus had essentially admitted that our father was giving him substantial financial support, despite the family's supposed financial stability. But where's the money coming from? I asked. Because the business accounts show some interesting transactions. Marcus stood up abruptly. I'm not listening to this garbage. You're just jealous because Dad finally stopped wasting money on a failure. What kind of transactions? Brad asked, genuinely curious. Invoices that don't match actual work performed. Payments to suppliers for equipment that never gets delivered to job sites. Money transfers that happen right before Marcus gets expensive gifts. I looked directly at my brother. Either Dad is stealing from the business, or he's the luckiest gambler in the state. The word gambler hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went white, and for a moment I thought he might actually faint. Shut up, he whispered. You don't know anything. I know about Vincent Moretti. I know about the $75,000 debt. And I know that money from Thompson Construction has been disappearing for months. I stood up to leave. The question is whether you're going to do the right thing or keep pretending this isn't happening. As I walked toward the door, Marcus grabbed my arm. For a second, I thought he might actually hit me in front of witnesses. You can't prove anything, he hissed. Actually, I can. Louis Franklin has been keeping backup records of everything. Bank transfers, falsified invoices, inventory reports. It's all documented. I pulled my arm free. The question is whether you want to fix this before it destroys the whole family, or whether you want to go down with Dad when the federal investigators get involved. The fear in Marcus's eyes told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just aware of the financial crimes. He was actively participating in them. I left Emma's apartment that night with more evidence than I'd hoped for. Marcus's reactions had confirmed that he knew about the gambling debts, the business fraud, and the source of his expensive lifestyle. More importantly, I now had witnesses who'd heard him essentially admit to accepting money that came from questionable sources. But the real breakthrough came 3 days later, when Derek called me during my lunch break at the warehouse. You need to meet with Amanda again, he said, his voice tense with urgency. She found something big. We met at the same diner, but this time Amanda looked genuinely frightened. She slid a manila envelope across the table without saying a word. Inside were bank transaction records that made the gambling debts look like pocket change. Over the past year, Thompson Construction had received payments for major projects that were never actually completed. Ghost invoices totaling over $50,000, all approved with forged signatures from contractors who'd never seen the work. This isn't just theft, Amanda said quietly. This is federal fraud. Wire fraud, bank fraud, probably tax evasion too. If your father gets caught, he's looking at serious prison time. How serious? 10 to 20 years, depending on how much money is involved and how long it's been going on. She leaned forward. And anyone who knowingly participated could be charged as an accessory. That night, I called Marcus from a payphone outside a gas station near my apartment. He answered on the first ring, probably hoping it was Emma calling to smooth things over after the awkward dinner. We need to talk, I said without identifying myself. Ezra, how did you get this number? That doesn't matter. What matters is that federal fraud charges carry a minimum sentence of 10 years. Do you understand what that means? The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Marcus spoke again. What do you want? I want the truth. All of it. And I want to know if you're willing to help fix this before it destroys everyone. I can't talk on the phone. Then meet me tomorrow night. The parking lot behind Miller's Hardware at 9 o'clock. Come alone. And if I don't? Then I turn everything over to the FBI on Monday morning, and you can explain to your football coach why you're being arrested for conspiracy to commit federal fraud. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I'd crossed a line from gathering evidence to actively threatening my own brother. But after months of being treated like garbage and seeing how deep the corruption ran, I felt justified in using every weapon at my disposal. The meeting with Marcus would either lead to a solution that saved the family, or it would confirm that they were all too far gone to be worth saving. Marcus showed up 20 minutes late, probably hoping I'd gotten tired of waiting and left. When he finally pulled into the empty hardware store parking lot, I was sitting on the hood of my beat-up Honda, having used the extra time to organize my thoughts and calm my nerves. He stayed in his truck for a full minute before finally getting out. Even in the dim streetlight, I could see that he looked terrible. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders and nervous glances of someone who knew they were in serious trouble. "This is insane," he said without preamble. "You're talking about destroying our entire family over some paperwork mistakes." $50,000 in fraudulent invoices isn't a paperwork mistake, I replied calmly. It's organized crime. Marcus started pacing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from childhood. He'd always done that when he was caught in a lie, and trying to figure out how to wiggle free. "Dad's been under a lot of stress," he said finally. "The gambling thing got out of hand, but he's working on it. The business stuff is temporary. He's planning to pay everything back." With what money, the company's barely breaking even on legitimate contracts, and Vincent Moretti doesn't seem like the patient type. I slid off the car hood and faced him directly. "Marcus, this isn't going away. Dad owes dangerous people more money than the business makes in a year, and he's been stealing from employees and contractors to cover debts that keep growing. So what do you want me to do about it?" "I want you to help me stop it before someone gets hurt." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Right. The family failure is going to save everyone. That's rich. The family failure has been documenting evidence for weeks, while you've been living off stolen money and pretending everything's fine." I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of bank records. "I've got enough evidence to send both of you to federal prison. The question is whether you're smart enough to help fix this instead." That's when Marcus made his second critical mistake. Instead of trying to negotiate or find a solution, he tried to intimidate me physically. He stepped forward with his fists clenched, probably expecting me to back down like I had countless times during our childhood. But I wasn't the same scared kid who'd let him push me around. Months of warehouse work had built muscle on my frame, and more importantly, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. "Go ahead," I said quietly, not moving. "Hit me. Add assault to your list of crimes. Give me another reason to make sure you go down with Dad." Marcus stopped short, apparently realizing that physical threats weren't going to work this time. "What do you want?" he asked again, but his tone was different now. Defeated. "I want you to convince Dad to get help for his gambling addiction and turn himself in for the financial crimes. I want full restitution paid to everyone who's been ripped off, and I want a public acknowledgement that you both lied about what happened on my birthday. And if he refuses, then I take everything I've gathered to the authorities and let them sort it out." I got back in my car. "You've got 1 week to make this right, Marcus. After that, I stop protecting you from the consequences of your choices." I drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot, but I wasn't done applying pressure. If Marcus and Dad thought they could ignore my ultimatum, they were about to learn otherwise. Over the next few days, I began a systematic campaign to make their lives as uncomfortable as mine had been. It started small. Anonymous tips to Dad's biggest clients, questioning the accuracy of recent invoices. Nothing that directly accused him of fraud, just suggestions that they might want to double-check their records against the work actually performed. The response was immediate. Within 48 hours, 3 different contractors called Dad, demanding meetings to review their accounts. The stress was visible on his face when I saw him at the grocery store, though he pretended not to notice me. Next, I contacted Tyler Morrison, a friend from high school, who now worked for the city's building inspection department. Without revealing family details, I mentioned that some recent Thompson construction permits seemed to have irregularities in the paperwork. What kind of irregularities? Tyler asked during our coffee meeting. Signatures that don't match previous documents. Work descriptions that don't align with the actual construction. The kind of thing that might indicate someone's cutting corners on safety requirements. Tyler took notes carefully. Building safety was something he took seriously, having seen too many accidents caused by shoddy work or fraudulent permits. I'll need to do a comprehensive review of their recent projects, he said. If there are safety violations, we'll have to halt work until everything's brought up to code. Within a week, Thompson Construction had 3 job sites shut down pending permit reviews. The financial impact was immediate and severe. Crews sitting idle while still being paid clients, demanding explanations, subcontractors threatening to pull out of future contracts. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma called me on a Thursday evening, sounding shaken. "I broke up with Marcus," she said without preamble. "What happened?" "I confronted him about the money, about the lies, about everything you told me. He got angry and said some things that showed me exactly what kind of person he really is." Her voice was thick with tears. "Ezra, he admitted that he knew about the stolen money. He said your dad deserved to keep his gambling debt secret because family business wasn't anyone else's concern." "Did he say anything else?" "He said you were just jealous of his success, and that you'd never amount to anything, even if your dad stopped wasting money on you." Emma's voice hardened. "But the worst part was when I asked him about your birthday. He laughed and said you deserved everything you got for disrespecting him." The confirmation that Marcus felt no remorse for the beating or the exile made my next decision easier. If he wasn't going to help fix the situation voluntarily, I'd have to force his hand. That weekend, I arranged for Jessica, our cousin on Mom's side, to accidentally run into our mother at the farmer's market downtown. Jessica had always been close to our family, and Mom trusted her completely. "I'm worried about Ezra," Jessica told Mom during their chance encounter. "I saw him at the grocery store last week and he looked terrible. Really thin, working himself to death." Mom's response was telling. Instead of showing concern for my well-being, she became defensive about the family's decision to cut me off. "He brought this on himself," Mom said, according to Jessica's later report. Richard had no choice but to defend Marcus. Ezra was becoming violent and unstable. "But Sarah, I've known that boy his whole life. Violence isn't in his nature." Jessica pressed gently. "And some of his friends are saying he's discovered some serious financial problems with the business. Problems that might explain why Richard was so stressed that night." Mom's face went pale. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that involve federal investigators and people who don't accept late payments." That evening, I received my first phone call from a family member in over 2 months. Mom was crying before I even said hello. "Ezra, please," she sobbed. "Whatever you're doing, you need to stop. You're scaring people. You're going to destroy everything." "I'm not destroying anything," I said calmly. "I'm just refusing to let destruction happen in secret anymore." "What do you want, money and apology? Just tell me what it will take to end this." "I want Dad to get help for his gambling addiction. I want him to stop stealing from his employees and contractors. And I want the truth about what really happened on my birthday." Richard would never steal from the business. Then why are 3 job sites shut down for permit fraud? Why are clients demanding to review their invoices? Why are federal banking regulators asking questions about unusual transaction patterns? The silence on the other end told me that Mom was beginning to understand how serious the situation had become. "You're going to send your father to prison," she whispered. "No. Dad's going to send himself to prison if he doesn't get help and make things right." I softened my voice slightly. "Mom, I don't want to hurt anyone. But I'm not going to pretend this isn't happening just to protect people who threw me away like garbage." "We didn't throw you away. We were protecting Marcus." "From what? From being called out for his cruelty? From facing consequences for taking money he knew was stolen?" The anger crept back into my voice. You protected him by sacrificing me, and now you're all going to pay the price for that choice." When I hung up, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The pressure campaign was working, but it was also making me realize just how far my family was willing to go to avoid facing reality. The breaking point came 3 days later when Vincent Moretti's people showed up at the family house. Jessica called me at 6 in the morning, her voice tight with panic. "Ezra, you need to know what happened last night. There were men at your parents' house. Dangerous-looking men who made it very clear they weren't social visitors." I was immediately awake, grabbing a notepad to take down details. "What exactly did you see?" "I was driving home from my shift at the hospital when I noticed 2 cars parked outside your family's house. Big guys in expensive suits, the kind you see in movies about organized crime. Your mother was standing on the porch in her nightgown crying while your father talked to them." "Did you hear anything?" "Enough to know they weren't there to discuss business partnerships. One of them kept pointing at the house and making gestures like he was measuring it. Another one had a folder full of papers he was showing your dad." My blood ran cold. Vincent Moretti's people were escalating from phone calls and letters to personal visits. That meant Dad's gambling debts had reached the point where his creditors were considering physical assets as collateral. "Where are my parents now?" "Still at the house as far as I know, but your mom looked terrified. Ezra, I think they're in real danger." After hanging up with Jessica, I sat in my tiny apartment, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to let my family face the consequences of their choices without any help from me. They'd thrown me out, lied about me, and refused every attempt I'd made to reconcile. Why should I risk my own safety to protect them? But another part of me realized that if something happened to my parents, I'd carry that guilt forever. Whatever our problems, they didn't deserve to be hurt by loan sharks. I called Derek and asked him to meet me at the diner, where we'd first discussed the financial evidence. When I explained the situation, his face grew serious. "If Moretti's people are making house calls, this is way beyond family drama," he said. "These are folks who solve problems with baseball bats and car accidents. I need to force a family meeting before someone gets hurt." "How your family's been ignoring you for months." "Not anymore. Last night changed everything. Mom knows they're in danger, and she knows I have information that could help solve this." I pulled out my phone. "I'm going to call and demand a meeting. If they refuse, I'll turn everything over to the FBI today and let federal agents protect them while Dad serves his prison sentence." Derek whistled low. "That's playing serious hardball." "They've been playing hardball with my life since my birthday. Now it's my turn." I made the call from a payphone outside the diner, not wanting to use my cell in case they tried to trace the location. Mom answered on the first ring, probably hoping it was someone with good news. "We need to talk," I said without identifying myself. "Ezra, oh God. Yes, we need to talk. Can you come home?" "I'm not coming to the house. Too dangerous for all of us. Meet me at Jessica's place tonight at 7. You, Dad, and Marcus. No exceptions. Your father won't want to leave the house right now." Then he can explain to Vincent Moretti's people why the FBI is asking questions about Thompson Construction's business practices. Because that's what happens if we don't meet tonight. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Mom spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "We'll be there." The 6 hours until the meeting felt like the longest day of my life. I spent the afternoon reviewing all my evidence one more time, organizing it into a presentation that would make the scope of the problem impossible to deny. Jessica had agreed to host the meeting at her house, partly because it was neutral territory, and partly because she was genuinely worried about our family's safety. Her husband, Ben, would be there as a witness and mediator, which gave everyone an extra layer of protection. At exactly 7 o'clock, I heard cars pulling into Jessica's driveway. Through the window, I watched my family climb out of Dad's truck, and I was shocked by how much they'd changed in just a few months. Dad looked like he'd aged 5 years. His face was gaunt, his clothes hung loose on his frame, and his hands shook slightly as he walked up to the house. The confident, domineering man who'd beaten me on my birthday had been replaced by someone who looked defeated and scared. Mom wasn't much better. Always meticulous about her appearance, she now looked drawn and exhausted. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. But Marcus looked the worst of all. The golden boy swagger was completely gone, replaced by the nervous demeanor of someone who knew they were in serious trouble. He kept glancing around like he expected to be arrested at any moment. Jessica let them in and led everyone to her living room. The awkwardness was immediate and overwhelming. These were people who'd shared holidays and birthdays and everyday dinners for 20 years. But now, we sat like strangers forced together by circumstances beyond our control. "All right," Ben said, taking charge of the situation. "Let's start with what everyone agrees on. Richard, you owe money to some dangerous people, and that debt is putting your family at risk. Is that accurate?" Dad nodded without looking at anyone. "Ezra, you've discovered evidence that business funds may have been used inappropriately. Is that accurate?" "More than inappropriately," I said, setting my folder of documents on the coffee table. "Fraudulently. $50,000 in fake invoices, forged signatures, and fabricated work orders." "That's not—" Dad started to protest, then stopped himself. "It's not what not true, not illegal. Not enough to send you to federal prison for 10 to 20 years. I opened the folder and spread out bank records showing the pattern of fraudulent transactions. "Dad, I've got documentation going back 8 months. Ghost invoices, payments for work that was never performed, equipment, purchases that never happened." Mom's face went white as she realized the scope of the problem. "Richard, you promised me it was just a few late payments. It was supposed to be temporary." Dad said, his voice barely audible. "I was going to pay it all back after the next big contract came through." "With what money?" Marcus demanded. "The business is barely breaking even on legitimate work." Everyone turned to look at him, and I saw my opening. "Since you brought it up, Marcus, let's talk about where your money has been coming from. The truck, the apartment, the spring break trips. How much did you think Dad was spending on your lifestyle?" "I didn't know about the business problems," Marcus said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Really? You didn't know that your father was stealing money to pay for your college expenses?" I pulled out more documents. "Because I've got bank records showing that every major payment for your lifestyle happened within days of a fraudulent invoice being processed." "You can't prove I knew where the money came from." "Actually, I can." I looked around the room. 3 nights ago, Marcus tried to intimidate me into dropping this investigation. During that conversation, he admitted that Dad had been helping him financially, and that the family's business wasn't my concern. Ben leaned forward. "Marcus, is that true?" "I was just trying to protect the family by covering up crimes." The room erupted in accusations and denials, with everyone talking over each other, until Jessica finally called for quiet. "Stop!" she shouted. "This isn't solving anything. Ezra, what do you want to happen here?" I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment that would determine whether my family could be saved, or whether it would destroy itself completely. I want Dad to turn himself in to federal authorities and cooperate fully with their investigation. I want him to enter a gambling addiction treatment program. I want full restitution paid to every employee and contractor who was ripped off. And I want a public acknowledgement that the story about my birthday was a lie, designed to cover up Dad's criminal activity. "And if we do all that?" Mom asked. "Then, I'll testify as a character witness at Dad's sentencing hearing and recommend the minimum possible punishment. I'll help the family rebuild the business legitimately, and I'll work with everyone to repair our relationships." "And if we don't?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a business card. "Then tomorrow morning, I turn everything over to Agent Patricia Hernandez at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and you can all deal with this without my help." Dad stared at the business card for a long moment, then looked around the room at his wife, his son, his nephew's wife, and finally at me. "There's something else you need to know," he said quietly. Something that makes this even worse than you realize. Dad's admission hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Everyone in the room stared at him, afraid to ask what could possibly make the situation worse than it already was. "Richard, what are you talking about?" Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. Dad reached into his wallet and pulled out a passport that looked new and unfamiliar. "I've been planning to disappear, leave the country, and start over somewhere Vincent Moretti can't find me." The words hit like physical blows. Mom gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Marcus stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. Even Jessica and Ben, who thought they'd heard the worst of it, looked shocked. "You were going to abandon us?" Mom's voice cracked with disbelief. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent," Dad said, but his tone suggested he knew how hollow that sounded. "I've got a contact in Mexico City who can get me work on construction projects. The plan was to send money back once I got established. While we dealt with your creditors and the federal investigation," I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "You were going to let us face the consequences while you disappeared to another country." Dad's confession seemed to break something in him. The defiant, aggressive man who'd beaten me on my birthday was replaced by someone who looked broken and ashamed. "I panicked," he admitted. "When Vincent's people started making threats about the house, about your mother, I didn't know what else to do." "You could have told the truth," Mom shouted, her composure finally cracking completely. "You could have asked for help instead of making everything worse." Marcus was pacing around the room like a caged animal. "This is insane. Dad, how are you planning to get money to send back if you're a fugitive in Mexico? There's a construction contract down there. Under the table work for American companies that need deniable labor." Dad's voice was getting smaller with every admission. "It pays well, because it's technically illegal." I felt like I was watching my family disintegrate in real time. Every revelation was worse than the last, and I was beginning to understand that the situation was far more desperate than I'd realized. "Dad, how long have you been planning this?" 2 months. Since Vincent's people first came to the house and made it clear that late payments weren't going to be tolerated much longer. 2 months, I repeated slowly. "So, when you beat me up and threw me out on my birthday, you were already planning to abandon the family." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad couldn't meet anyone's eyes, but his lack of denial was answer enough. "Oh my God," Mom whispered. "You let me believe we were protecting Marcus from his violent brother, when really you were just eliminating witnesses who might interfere with your escape plan." It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Marcus demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were getting rid of anyone who might ask too many questions about the money." I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. "Actually, that's not the worst part. The worst part is what you just admitted to in front of witnesses." Dad looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Conspiracy to commit international fraud, money laundering, flight to avoid prosecution, abandonment of financial responsibilities." I gestured to my phone. "Everything you just said has been recorded. And unlike the business fraud, these are crimes you confessed to in front of multiple witnesses." The blood drained from Dad's face as he realized what he'd done. In his desperation to explain himself, he'd admitted to planning crimes that carried even heavier penalties than the ones he was already facing. Marcus slumped back into his chair. "We're completely screwed." "Not necessarily," I said carefully, "but the situation has definitely changed." Ben, who'd been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation, looked up from his legal pad. "Ezra, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that running away to Mexico isn't going to solve anything. Vincent Moretti doesn't strike me as the type who gives up just because someone changes countries. And federal investigators definitely don't stop pursuing cases because the suspect flees." "So what do you suggest?" Mom asked. I looked around the room at my broken family, realizing that I was now the only one with any leverage or clear thinking left. "We turn everything over to the FBI voluntarily tonight. Dad cooperates fully with their investigation and provides information about his Mexican contact and the illegal construction scheme. He enters witness protection in exchange for testifying against the larger fraud operation. Witness protection. Dad looked terrified. It's better than being murdered by loan sharks or spending 20 years in federal prison. I stood up and started gathering my documents. But here's the thing. This only works if everyone cooperates completely. No more lies, no more cover-ups, no more protecting people who don't deserve protection. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. What does that mean for me? It means you return every dollar you received that came from fraudulent sources. It means you testify honestly about what you knew and when you knew it. And it means you stop pretending you're the victim in this situation. I didn't know the money was stolen. Stop lying. I slammed my hand on the coffee table, making everyone jump. I've got recordings of you admitting that you knew about the gambling debts and the financial problems. You took money from Dad, knowing that the business was in trouble. That makes you an accessory after the fact. The room fell silent again, as everyone processed the implications. Marcus wasn't just the spoiled golden child anymore. He was potentially facing criminal charges of his own. Mom broke the silence with a question that cut to the heart of everything. Ezra, why are you willing to help us after everything we've done to you? I thought about the question for a long moment, trying to find words for feelings that were complex and contradictory. Because despite everything, you're still my family. Because Dad needs help for his gambling addiction, and prison won't provide that help. Because Marcus is young enough to learn from this and become a better person. And because Mom doesn't deserve to lose her house and her security because of choices she didn't make. I paused, looking directly at each of them. But mostly because I've learned that revenge doesn't actually make you feel better. It just makes you feel empty. What makes you feel better is knowing you did the right thing, even when it's hard. Dad started crying, then deep sobs that shook his entire body. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry for everything. For the gambling, for the stealing, for hitting you, for planning to run away. I've destroyed everything good in my life. For the first time in months, I felt genuine sympathy for him. This wasn't the arrogant, violent man who'd beaten me on my birthday. This was a broken human being who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. Dad, sorry isn't enough anymore. You need to prove you're willing to change starting right now. I pulled out Agent Hernandez's business card and set it on the coffee table. We're going to call her tonight. We're going to tell her everything. And tomorrow morning, we're going to the FBI field office to start making this right. Dad nodded slowly, wiping tears from his eyes. What about Vincent Moretti? The FBI will handle Vincent Moretti. That's what they do. They protect people who cooperate with investigations against dangerous criminals. Mom reached over and took Dad's hand. Richard, we have to do this. It's the only way to keep everyone safe. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then finally spoke up. What about my scholarship? What about college? You'll figure it out the same way millions of other students do, through honest work, student loans, and academic merit. I looked at him seriously. Marcus, this is your chance to prove you're more than just Dad's golden boy. Are you going to take it? He nodded reluctantly. I don't have a choice. Actually, you do have a choice. You could keep lying and covering up and hoping this all goes away. But that choice leads to federal prison. I stood up and headed for the door. I'm going to call Agent Hernandez now. The rest of you need to decide whether you're going to cooperate or whether you're going to keep destroying each other with lies. As I dialed the number, I realized that the scared 20-year-old who'd been beaten and thrown out on his birthday was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that real strength comes from doing the right thing, even when it's painful, even when it's scary, and even when the people you're helping don't deserve your help. The phone rang twice before Agent Hernandez answered. Agent Hernandez, this is Ezra Thompson. I believe you've been expecting my call. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot of the federal courthouse, watching my father walk out as a free man. The judge had sentenced him to 2 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory participation in a gambling addiction treatment program. It could have been much worse. The prosecutor had initially sought a 5-year prison sentence. The difference came down to cooperation. Dad had spent 3 months working with federal investigators to expose the illegal construction scheme he'd been planning to join in Mexico. His testimony helped authorities arrest 12 people involved in a multi-million-dollar fraud operation that exploited undocumented workers while cheating American companies. Vincent Moretti was also behind bars, along with 6 members of his organization. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division had been building a case against them for years, and Dad's detailed records of his gambling debts provided the final pieces they needed to secure convictions. But the legal victories were only part of the story. The real change had happened within our family. Dad looked different as he walked toward us. 6 months of sobriety, regular therapy, and honest work had restored some of his old dignity. He was still thin from stress and worry, but his eyes were clear for the first time in years. "How does it feel?" I asked as he reached our little group. "Terrifying," he admitted, "but also like I can breathe again." Mom hugged him carefully, as if she was afraid he might disappear. Their marriage had survived, but it was built on a foundation of honesty that hadn't existed before. She'd learned to set boundaries and demand transparency. He'd learned to ask for help instead of trying to handle everything alone. Marcus stood a little apart from the rest of us, still processing his own transformation. Losing his scholarship had been devastating at first, but it had also forced him to develop qualities he'd never needed before: humility, work ethic, and genuine empathy for other people's struggles. He was now working construction for Lewis Franklin, who'd taken over Thompson Construction after Dad's legal troubles forced him to step back. The work was hard and humbling, but Marcus was learning skills that would serve him well, whether he eventually returned to college or pursued a career in the trades. "I never thanked you," he said quietly as we walked to our cars. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For finding a way to fix things instead of just destroying them." He paused. "And for not letting me keep being the person I was." The relationship between Marcus and me would never be the close brotherhood that some siblings enjoyed, but it was honest now in a way it had never been before. He'd apologized publicly for the lies he'd told about my birthday, and he'd started paying back every dollar he'd received from fraudulent sources. "Marcus," I said, stopping next to his pickup truck, "you're going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. You just needed to learn how to be proud of things you actually earned." He nodded and got in his truck, heading back to the job site where he was helping build low-income housing for families who reminded him of his own struggles. The real surprise had come 2 months earlier, when I received acceptance letters from 3 different 4-year universities. Apparently, community college instructors had been writing recommendation letters describing my work ethic and academic improvement. Combined with my unique life experiences and the maturity I'd developed during the family crisis, admissions committees saw potential they might have missed in a traditional applicant. I'd chosen State University, the same school where Marcus had lost his scholarship. Not because I wanted to compete with him, but because they offered the best program in social work. After everything I'd been through, I wanted to help other families navigate crises and find solutions that preserve their relationships instead of destroying them. Dad had insisted on paying my tuition using money he earned from his court-mandated community service work. It wasn't charity or an attempt to buy forgiveness. It was his way of showing that he valued education and wanted to support his son's legitimate achievements. "You ready for this?" Mom asked as we stood outside the courthouse. She was referring to my birthday party that evening. For the first time in years, the whole family would be celebrating together, but this time, the dynamic would be completely different. "More ready than I've ever been," I said honestly. The party was held at Jessica's house again, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from that tense family meeting 6 months earlier. Dad brought a chocolate cake he'd made himself. Part of his therapy involved learning to express care through actions instead of money. Marcus had written a speech acknowledging his past behavior and committing to being a better brother and son. Mom had organized a photo album documenting my academic and personal achievements over the past year. But the best gift came from Louis Franklin, who'd driven over after his workday to make an announcement. Ezra, I've been watching how you handled this whole situation with your family. The maturity, the strategic thinking, the ability to find solutions instead of just pointing out problems. Louis handed me an envelope. I'd like you to consider joining Thompson Construction as a partner when you graduate college. We need someone who understands that doing the right thing is the only way to build something that lasts. Inside the envelope was a formal business proposal, outlining a path for me to eventually take over the company. It included provisions for ethical oversight, community engagement, and a commitment to treating employees and contractors fairly. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say you'll think about it, Louis replied. The construction business needs people who understand that integrity isn't optional. It's the foundation everything else is built on. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation. I know I can't undo what I did to you, he said. The violence, the favoritism, the lies. None of that can be taken back. Dad, we don't need to rehash everything again. Yes, we do. Because I need you to understand something. He looked directly at me, with an intensity I'd rarely seen from him. You saved our family, not just from legal consequences or financial ruin, but from becoming people we couldn't live with being. He gestured toward the house where the rest of our family was cleaning up and laughing together. Marcus is learning what it means to earn respect instead of demanding it. Your mother has learned to speak up for herself instead of enabling bad behavior. And I'm learning that being a father means protecting your children from dangers, including the danger of becoming entitled or dishonest. Dad paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. But most importantly, you've learned something that I never taught you, and that you couldn't have learned any other way. You've learned that real strength isn't about dominating other people or getting your way through force. Real strength is about doing what's right, even when it costs you something. As I drove home that night to the apartment I now shared with Jake and 2 other roommates, I thought about the journey that had brought our family to this point. A year ago, I'd been the disposable son, the family failure, the one who didn't matter. Tonight, I was the one my family looked to for guidance and leadership. But the most important change wasn't in how they saw me. It was in how I saw myself. I'd learned that worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or expectations. It's determined by your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. It's determined by your ability to find solutions instead of just complaining about problems. And it's determined by your capacity to show mercy to people who've hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because forgiveness sets you free. The scared 20-year-old who'd tasted his own blood on his birthday had grown into someone who understood that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's turning them into family again. 3 years later, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in social work and a minor in business administration. Dad, Mom, Marcus, and half the neighborhood came to watch me walk across the stage. When the ceremony ended, and I found them in the crowd, Dad approached me with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of the man you've become, son," he said, embracing me. "Thank you for saving us from ourselves." Looking around at my family, flawed, scarred, but honest and whole, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is refusing to accept their worst treatment of you. Real love requires real respect, and sometimes you have to fight for both. But when that fight leads to healing instead of destruction, when it builds bridges instead of walls, and when it creates space for everyone to become better versions of themselves, that's when you know you found something worth fighting for. The boy who was beaten and disowned had grown into a man who understood that strength comes not from revenge, but from the courage to demand that love be backed up by actions that prove its worth. Now, I want to ask you something that I think about often. Have you ever been in a situation where standing up for yourself felt impossible because it meant challenging people you loved? How did you find the courage to demand the respect you deserved? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's facing a similar struggle. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger relationships. And share this video with someone who might need to hear that they have the power to change their circumstances, even when the odds seem impossible. Thank you for listening, and remember, you have more strength than you realize. Sometimes you just need to discover it by refusing to accept less than you deserve. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.